Thank you for tuning in once again to Moments That Matter. This week we're rejoining Kathy Tilly Schaefer, Paul Schatzberger for a continued conversation of the stories in his recent book, Moments That Matter. As an added bonus, we'll step into a few stories that did not make it in the book, but you'll certainly want to hear. As always, feel free to get your own copy of this newly released book, either in print or digital version, from Amazon, linked in the description.
So you've read the book twice. You've also read the first book that I wrote, which is amazing. So what else did you find interesting or encouraging about the stories in the book?
Oh, wow. Well, your first book, Choices, was just so enlightening. I bought 3 copies of it. I gave it to friends. I'm going to buy another copy for our church library. I loved it. Sort of kind of helps me understand predestination, and that conflict people have, and all that. It really just gave me some understanding that I hadn't. It was like a light bulb went off, and I love that the analogy or metaphor, whatever you use for the ship and the I may be saying it wrong, Bulima and Thelema. Am I said it correctly?
Bulima and Thelema.
Okay,
Yeah.
I said it incorrectly. But it really gave me great understanding, and then played into this book and your life and everything. I'm just trying to think about there was one statement, and I think this person that you, Parker Palmer, that you quote a lot. I need to get some of his books.
Yes, you do.
The one that really, I wrote this down. I'm going to use it in graduation cards.
Okay.
The place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep needs. I just love that.
And he's actually quoting someone else at that point. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted you to tell me more about that I didn't quite get was the Catch the Fire event in It's kind of like, was it sort of a charismatic thing?
It was a very charismatic thing, yeah. And we just kind of joined the party. I mean, it had been going on 7 years at that point up there, and I mean, literally just meetings every day, and extensive meetings. They would start meeting, I don't know, 7, 8 at night and go past midnight, and it would be like every night, and this you have to understand too. This church is a tiny little church. They had to actually build a bigger church just to accommodate all the people who wanted to come and be like part of this or whatever. And then after a while, they started offering these conferences. And that's what I attended, the Catch the Fire conference. And now actually the church is called Catch the Fire. But so it was a little bit more organized by the time I got around to it. I think it was just kind of, it is what it is, when you showed up before. But it was just cool for us because at my group that went up, because we had this kind of personal connection, to one of the speakers. And I think if that had not been the case, I don't know, we might have all been like that woman that I described as being kind of balled up, and praying for God to, let her go home, because it was so unusual. We had stuff, some of the stuff that had been happening like that in our church in the previous few months, but not at that level. It was just completely different. And yeah, I mean, it taught me a lot. It taught me, well, of course, me personally, it really taught me about freedom. I mean, really, what that means, spiritual freedom. But it also taught me a lot about the people that I was going to meet in Ukraine. And so I couldn't have even imagined that was part of the reason that God brought me up there. Because we were dealing almost exclusively with charismatic and Pentecostal churches in Ukraine. And this was their background. And if you did not have that same kind of background, there was no trust of you, because you were just this interloper, this outsider, whatever. But because of that experience and because nothing like that really scared me anymore, I was just there among them and with them and participating, and everything was great. And the other thing is, too, that I did a lot of teaching in Ukraine. I don't really talk so much about that, but, I taught like listening for the voice of God as an example, and some other, slightly charismatically related courses. And again, I think without that personal experience, I think they would have just kind of written it off and say, well, those are nice words, but they don't really mean a lot. So it meant something very personal for me, but it also meant something for my whole ministry to have experienced that. And there was another revival going on at that time in Pensacola, and that was huge. And so people were going in all different directions, at that point, late 90s, early 2000s, and going to these different conferences and everything else like that, because, it was right exciting what God was doing. And sometimes you go to those meetings, like a typical kind of revival meeting, and you're just like, well, it's just another church service, But I literally walked into that church in Toronto, and it was just the presence of the Spirit. It was just unbelievable. I cannot even describe to you what that felt like. And the closer you got to the stage, the more it just overpowering it became. There's a story I do not relate in the book. Again, this group went up there, and there was a guy there who was kind of resistant, let's say, to all of this. And not that I was just, all for it or something like that, but he was pretty skeptical of the whole thing. And essentially what he said to us before we went up is, if this stuff isn't happening to me, then I'm not going to believe it. If I just see it, other people fall down or whatever, whatever like that, I'm not going to believe it. So God always accepts our challenges, and so we were standing there just worshiping. That's all we're doing. There's a band. We're just, singing along, everything else like that. He's standing in front of me. He's in the row in front of me. It's hard to describe this over a podcast, and you can see me now, Tilly, but he just looked at me, and he just went, boom, right over. Just absolutely fell out. And nobody had prayed for him. Nobody had touched him, or anything like that. And I tell you what, he got up from that, and he was just like, okay, I believe it. It was amazing. So I was seeing stuff like that all the time. And just God, I was very impressed that God would kind of touch us in the way that we would respond to it, or the way that we needed it, or however you want to say that. So this guy had said this thing, and then he did that thing. So that that it was those kinds of experiences, and there was a lot of it, and like I said, it just kind of set me up for what was coming. Because I could have definitely written it off as a one-time thing. But, yeah, it turned out it wasn't a one-time thing. It was like a 7-year thing,
But you also said in your church that this had been, it was becoming, maybe it was a charismatic church. I looked it up. I was doing some stalking today, and so it was a Presbyterian church.
Yes.
I was a Presbyterian for a while.
Uh-huh.
Presbyterian minister married me to my husband in the Baptist church. But anyway, that was surprising to me. And then it sounded like you have the gift of healing?
I have never said that, that I do. I have, I was just in those moments, there was a need for that. And I think God used me. But I have been around people who have the gift of healing, and I am not like those people because they have a faith that is just mountainous. And I have never quite gotten to that point. And I'll give you an example of this, which is definitely not in the book. There was a group that came over from Virginia, from a church, to Ukraine, and they did a series of like trainings on prayer for healing. Okay, and it was in this one church, and so the way they set it up was they would train during the day, and then we, who were being trained, would attend the service in the evening, which was a healing service, and we would be the ones praying for people. So it was very hands-on, and also a bit of a test of, like you can't just hear this stuff. You can't just like listen to this stuff. You actually have to kind of enter into it. And I will just say that there was a power there that I had never really experienced before, and I knew it wasn't just me, because this stuff was happening all over the place, and really extreme stuff, I would say. Like, okay, very quick story. Don't mean to take a lot of time, with this, but there was a woman who came up for prayer, and she had been losing her sight gradually. So she's an older woman. And she said, I just want to read the Bible, And I thought, well, I mean, God, you hear this, right? For sure you want her to read the Bible. So I was praying with a translator, okay? And we're praying together. And what we had been taught was, okay, you pray for a while, and then you check the person. You say, are you feeling different? Whatever is being prayed for, are you able to do this thing? So we stopped and we said, do you feel any different? No, I don't feel any different. And then I thought, well, okay, the bottom line is, seeing. So I asked my translator for his Bible, because it was a Russian Bible. And wouldn't you know, it was like, okay, one of those pocket, version Bibles with this tiny little print. And I was like, God, come on, give me a break. Anyway, so I said, can you read anything? And she said, yeah, I can read that this is the Gospel of John. So she could read the big letters up at the top. And I said, okay, fine. So we'll keep on praying. So we just prayed a few more minutes. And I said, now tell me if things are different. And I showed her the Bible, and she just read the whole page. Okay. And it was stuff like that I had never seen before, and I knew it wasn't me. What I think was, this pastor had such a gift of faith that he was literally able to kind of, inspire that gift in others. And then things happened that hadn't happened before. So that did happen with me in the healing service back at my home church before I ever went to Ukraine. And that was a blessing, because it's hard to be around people who are sick and say, okay, come on up for prayer, let's pray for you. And they just come week after week after week. It's really discouraging. And so I was like, God, something needs to happen here. And that's what changed basically after that conference, was that people were getting healed. And then I took over that service and started preaching there and praying for healing and that sort of thing. And again, it just led naturally to Ukraine. So I was just very grateful that God doesn't just throw us into, a situation and we have no idea what we're doing, and the people go, well, you're just kind of a joke, but he really does prepare us. So I thought that was cool.
It's interesting that, and I didn't really get this from the book, and maybe I just didn't read into it enough, that the Ukrainians have this charismatic background, mm-hmm. And that is so interesting with the communism, the coldness of communism, and to have this type of faith with the charismatic end of it.
And that's exactly why they do. So just give you the timeline on this. The Baptist Church, Pentecostal Church, kind of the more mainline denominations, they were there since communism. Okay, so it was like the 1920s. And so they were the ones that went underground. when the communists really took over and started persecuting and everything else like that. But when independence came in 1991, then you had this flood of evangelists come into the country and hold these giant rallies, and thousands of people are getting saved, and like instant church. You have these churches just pop up like this, and most of those were charismatic. So the charismatic kind of came after, like all the communists and everything else like that, and it was exactly a reaction to freedom, I think, and independence and everything else like that. And it was just like, this is the best thing ever. And so, they just started all these churches. And but what we found was, with regard to the institute that I directed, what we found was that there wasn't a lot of education. There wasn't a lot of preparation. And that includes the pastor. So, there was just this need for instruction. And so we started with this bachelor program, and the pastor would go through it, the leadership would go through it, and then everybody else in the church would go through it. And there was just this strengthening of the foundation of the church, And then we started a master's, and then later after I left, they started a doctorate, So that, it's really kind of a full service, program at this point. But it really met a need, because you had these, again, instant churches, but they were kind of built on sand, as opposed to the solid rock. And and so I think what we did was we kind of extended the life of these churches, because it's certainly possible that they would have collapsed, under their own weight at some point.
I was sad and wondered how you dealt. You did talk about it, but dealing with the duplicity of some of the people within your organization and the churches, that would be very disheartening. I would have a really hard time with that, and people questioning my integrity. That really would bother me. So how did you get through that?
It was not,
but I want to hear more.
Yeah. It was not easy. And Scott is a former missionary himself. We've seen a lot of the same things, I think. But I will say, because of Ukraine's background, atheistic background, communist background, it's a combination of really awful kind of effects. You have the self-protection, and just like defend yourself at all costs, and sort of lay low, and all that other stuff. But you also have the dishonesty and just the outright lying, just to, again, really actually just for self-protection, and or personal gain. It's basically two things. And you don't just turn that tap off, when communism goes away. And so it just, I think, morphed into a different form. It morphed out of the communist thing, and it morphed into, unfortunately, some of the churches. And the churches became very controlling places, very manipulative places, and unfortunately a place where you could definitely be lied to. And it was so it was difficult. And we were there for 7 years, and I can say that maybe without that effect, that particular aspect of things, we might have been there longer. But it wears on you. It really does. Scott, I don't know if you have something else to throw in on that one.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's one of the things you don't plan for, but one of the things that you're a little bit shocked by and discouraged by. Tilly, it's almost like I have said the exact words you said regarding your collegiate experience in marketing. I, too, was in marketing. I went to High Point University, and the same sort of feelings over the jadedness, I guess, that happens is that same feeling that says, I don't know that I want to be in advertising and marketing, convincing people to buy things that they don't need. And it sort of changes your view a little bit. And I found the same thing to be true there on the mission field, sure enough.
Where were you a missionary?
I served in West Africa and Ghana for a little bit, and then in East Africa and Kenya for a bit longer.
What years were you there?
So I was there over from 2003 to 2007 at different points in time.
Because when I was trying to figure out what I would do after graduation, Peace Corps was one of the things that I wanted to do. And a guy in the dorm had been a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana.
Wow, yeah.
And he taught me, he knew how immature I was and just clueless. Paul used that word in his book a lot, but he isn't clueless, but I truly was clueless. and he knew that I would not be able to handle the extremes of poverty that he described to me that were there. Of course, this was a long time ago, so maybe conditions have changed. Had they? Was it
honestly, I think maybe depending on where people were serving, I know at least in the northern part of Ghana, it was a lot more challenging. We started in the city in Accra, in the capital, and it wasn't too big. Of course, I grew up in North Carolina living outside, and the wilds of Africa were so, there was a romanticism, I think, of it all, and so I loved every minute of it. But we spent some time there in Accra, and then we moved out into a village called Adusa that had about 500 people and no running water, no electricity. It was pretty primitive, but it was about par for the course for the people that lived outside the cities. And it was a shock, and it was a struggle. There was probably a lot more struggle toward the northern part of the country that was a large Islamic population. And because of that, I think people had a difficulty gaining access to go and provide assistance. Some of the groups were not very open to Westerners, and I found that interesting. But, so much of your story I recognize. When I was in High Point University, we had Campus Crusade for Christ that was a student-led ministry. And so day number one, when I'm on campus as a freshman, I got involved with Campus Crusade for Christ and started helping lead things when I was a sophomore. And then when I was a junior, all the former leadership was gone. And since it was a student-led ministry, it was kind of like, well, I guess I'll do it. And so I led Campus Crusade for Christ there on campus my junior year and my senior year. And for me, that was such a formative experience. And I think probably the lessons and the skill sets that I learned through that maybe had a more lasting effect than what I did academically, because I never used my marketing degree for the most part. And I double majored in computer information systems development, and I might have used that a little bit, but I really think that for me, that campus ministry sort of opened doors and provided an avenue for my holy discontent that I was experiencing with my major, and gave an avenue which ultimately led me to the mission field right after I graduated.
Yeah, you talk about InterVarsity kind of, and your experience. I mean, all these are such formative experiences, that you really can't put a price on. You think, I'm just in this group, I'm just leading this group, I'm just doing it. But yeah, God's just kind of working through all of that stuff. It's really cool. Well, it's been a delight talking to you, Tilly. Yeah. That's just been way too long, and love to go down memory lane a little bit with you, but also catch up. That's also awesome. So thanks for spending time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and thank you for these books. They're wonderful books.
Thanks for listening to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives, which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We'll relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the Clearness Committee moments, those we choose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.